and they're not just mental, frameworks that the mind splutters around in to make sense of the day. Some of it is, of course, some of it is just crazy montages of your anxieties and dreams and fantasies and so on. But some of those dreams are actual 4-dimensional encounters. But they're quite spontaneous, those. And it's very difficult unless you're some kind of like Carlos Castaneda committed 20-year individual to actually develop strong, consistent, lucid dreaming. It's very difficult, that.
Sure.
The most planned and strategized ways of moving consciousness into the 4D is using meditation techniques, and not in the necessarily old-fashioned sense of sitting down in seated posture for like years on end, but actually a meditative principle in most things that you do. So whether you're washing the dishes or driving the car or whatever, you can successfully do those things in a safe and effective manner, but you can put your mind into a meditative state where you're not identifying with you as necessarily Neil Kramer or Chipper Dog. You can be just an identity observing itself, and then as you do that, that identity begins to dissolve. And again, as you're no doubt aware, this is a very old practice, but it teaches people experientially that your identity is really a construct that you use to focus consciousness through, and it's not absolutely necessary. It's like an art project, I call it. Your whole life is like an art project. You can kind of do whatever you want with it, and it can be as beautiful or as ugly or as elegant or as crazy as you want. And that's
as long as it's invested as long as you invest you into it.
Yes, that's right. If, like any art, if it's going to be real and authentic and good, to use a simple word for it, the artist needs to put mind, body, and spirit, the whole thing, right into the middle of it. And you can tell that no matter what format of art it is. I studied abstract expressionism for 3 years at college, and I'm very, very interested in that. More by what it means than what it is, and more by what it was trying to achieve than what it actually results on the canvas. But it's the same thing. I can tell by looking at a painting who was committed to that and who wasn't. And I think everybody can, quite frankly. And life is the same in that what you look like and what your name is and how much money you've got is kind of irrelevant. What's more significant is how deep you put yourself into your own art projects and how committed you are to that.
Yeah, I find myself having to climb up out of them rather than putting myself into deep.
Well, one has to be careful with that, because then you start to disenfranchise yourself from the whole of normal society. So there are some challenges with that. You don't want to stop brushing your teeth and putting deodorant on, really, do you?
Well, I used a phrase the other day with Cliff talking about the undulating ridge, that it's a walk on. I mean, there is no solid, unshifting line that you can walk. It just have to get used to that rhythm. Thank you so much, Neil.
You're welcome.
Neil, I'm going to hand you off to Uranus Rising.
Thank you.
Hi, Neil.
Hi.
The other day I read, my personal project is the re-indigenization of the self. Part of that is simply living more with plants as food, friend, and fellow traveler on the way. I really, really resonated with this, and plants are everything to me, and I live in a forest. Synchronistically, that same day, I received some of the plant teacher, Salvia divinorum. So I'm shortly to go to her for some teaching, and I wonder if you have any words of wisdom as I embark on this path.
You know full well that I do.
Yes, I do.
I think the principle of what you're saying is really important, that the re-indigenization, or whatever, I can't even pronounce that, to gain a new relationship with our indigenous self and our indigenous connection to the land and so on and so forth, to understand that we're not just modern disconnected people, that we are actually deeply connected to the land and to the environment that we find ourselves. Even if you are in a city, that doesn't change. It just becomes more complex. But if you're fortunate enough to live in a natural environment of whatever ecosystem that presents itself as, then you have the opportunity, because that is relevant right now in your life, whoever you are, wherever you are, you have that opportunity to understand that there's a lot of other stuff that's alive and intelligent around you. And ironically, what appears to be a very simple, what I would call second density life form, physically, which is a plant, they are the things that are transdimensional in that they exist very strongly and very fluidly in 3 dimensions at the same time, the fourth, third, and second in my formulation of this, which is a model, it's just a way of thinking about this. But how ironic it is to imagine that a plant that grows on the wet slopes of Oaxaca in Mexico is such a profound teacher and is so able to help us heal and help us create the space to receive the signal and help us to progress in the most intimate and personally relevant ways imaginable. And the idea that a plant is going to do this is like a shock to some people. And everybody now has heard about things like ayahuasca and so on. And as I've said before, it's become very popular, that, which is good and bad. But people are hearing about it, which is a good thing, because it's instilling in people the notion that green things that grow out of the ground can actually share information with us. And if you put yourself in the right environment with that, and you educate yourself, and you become familiar with the appropriate techniques of creating that relationship, then it is undeniable how intimate and how profound and how loving, quite frankly, although that's an unusual word for some people right now, at how that relationship manifests itself. And salvia in particular is quite interesting because it's salvinorin A, which is the active psychoactive component in that plant, is incredibly powerful. Maybe one of the most powerful psychoactive substances proportionately to what the plant it's in. And it can bring consciousness to a place, again, when configured correctly, where a lot of regressive therapeutic techniques that take 10 years to properly unfold in the psychiatric environment can be achieved in about 7 minutes. And I have seen many cases of this. I have personal experiences of the advantages of this technique, and I have studied this to some depth from an operational level, not necessarily a kind of ethnobotanical scientific level. I'll leave that to others because that's not the way I work. But if I am going to familiarize myself and acquaint myself with a sacred plant, then I certainly make it my business to know as much about that plant as possible. Just as in the same way that if I was going to acquaint myself with a woman and marry her, I would do exactly the same thing.
Right.
And I would become intimate, and I want to know loads of things, and I want to share experiences, and I want to be open, and I want to be honest, and I want to be sincere. And again, in the same way as a relationship, it's as important to share your weaknesses as it is your strengths. And certainly with that particular plant, it deals very graciously with one's weaknesses and its ability to pinpoint what those are and get to them in such a ornate and graceful manner is mind-boggling, really. And things that I was just not aware of. I don't care what any psychologist might tell me. Things I was not aware of, I have been shown through a plant that grows in the ground. And that is an experience that immediately shifts your perspective on what is intelligent and what lives here and what the order of importance is. Because something so wise that has no brain that makes you consider seriously how intelligence is formulated and how it's shared. And that, again, you can't really take anybody's word for this. It has to be a felt experience. And of course, always when talking about these things, we have to exercise a little bit of diligence and concern and caution here, because it's not just a drug experience in a recreational manner like hippies would take LSD or clubbers would take MDMA. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a sacred medicine that is extremely powerful. And
Right.
as with any medicine, it's to be taken cautiously and with a high degree of intelligence and with some particular concern about legalities and so on, because some of these things you're not supposed to use. Some of them you can, but only in certain environments. And above all that, of course, your own safety and health. You have to consider those. But once that's done and once that's achieved and once you've satisfied yourself that you're doing it in a safe, sane and legal manner, the experience with salvia and a lot of other plants, quite frankly, I talk about salvia quite a bit, but there are many others, is undeniable as an assistant, as a helper, as a spirit, as a guide here. And it's the beauty of it is that it's totally organic, it's totally natural, and it's totally something that we've had a relationship with for millennia. And the fact that serious psychology and psychiatry and philosophy and science in an academic sense is not recognizing this shows us the depth of that disconnect, and the fact that you have to go to these what were once called savages of the Amazon to get the principal knowledge of it, again shows us how ridiculous our anthropological perceptions were only 100 years ago. But the beauty of these sacred plants is that they're everywhere. Some of them are mushrooms, some of them are vines, some of them are sage plants, some of them are mint plants. And they're all over Europe and America and Africa and all over the place. So each different geographical and cultural region has its own sacred totem, in a sense. And in Europe, it's chiefly, certainly in Britain, it's the mushroom. And that has its own resonances and its own abilities and its own peculiarities, which seem curiously and fascinatingly to be particularly aimed at the Western cultural mindset, whereas ayahuasca is particularly aimed at the, Amazonian basin, South American mindset.
Uh-oh, we lost him.
Hello, Neil?
Hello, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I don't know what occurred then.
It sounded like you were talking about the framework within which that cultural awareness came to be.
Yeah, essentially, what I'm saying is that each particular plant seems to be configured specifically for the region and for the cultural accoutrements and for the sociological paradigms that it finds itself in. So it is an interesting and wise move to consider what is the recognized sacred plant medicine for where you live or where you grew up or where you now live. What is it there? You needn't necessarily haul ass out to Ecuador to do a ayahuasca circle. It might not be appropriate for you. Research what is relevant where you are.
This is fascinating, Neil, because even though I'm living in Britain now, I haven't been attracted to the mushrooms. Yet I am extremely attracted to this. And funny enough, I have a very strong connection with Oaxaca and have been there many times. Yes.